I'm sure a lot of you have encountered shoulder fitting issues when you're sewing, meaning that the joint of the sleeve with your armhole is maybe dropped, falling off your shoulder, or it's just too narrow and you feel pulling. So we're gonna go into the root of the problem, why that can happen, probably not what you think, and of course, solutions, how to fix. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, limitless sewing, and today is about fitting the shoulders. Now, this is a topic I have been brainstorming for quite a while. It's been a long time coming. I have two big fitting series on the channel. One is about sewing woven pants, and the other one is about sewing a simple woven top. So these are sort of ongoing. I suppose I can still keep adding onto these fitting series, especially with sewing woven styles for our upper body. You have no idea that this series is on the channel. I've got all around me a whole bunch of thumbnails and we go over so many topics. If you are struggling and you want to dive in a little deeper on your fitting, I think this whole series will help you. It goes over so much, like picking your sizes, blending sizes, adjusting for your vertical lengths, so much. Full bust adjustments, small bust adjustments, it's all in this series. Now what we're going to discuss today is about shoulders, and what I'm going to talk about may apply to knit sewing as well in some way. Before we hop into all the shoulder business, I wanted to let you know what I'm wearing. This is one of my Sloan sweaters from Love Notions. It's a really versatile knit pattern that is the feature Friday today. So only today Friday you can purchase it for $5. It's 60% off the regular price. I have a full sew along sewing this, and it includes the cuffs, the neckband, every little single detail. If you are newer to sewing, I think the sew along could help you. And then I've had fun doing hacks. So this is a really special one. It was really handy when I was getting my vaccinations. I wore this top and bang, I was ready to go. I've also made other hacks, and I do have content about this pattern on the channel already, so have a look. I'll leave you my affiliate link down below, and don't forget to use my code Karina10 at checkout for an extra 10% off even when there's a sale happening. So let's hop back into the shoulder business. In my mind and in my plans, I always knew I was going to include this topic later, much later, after covering all the other ones that I have already discussed, because all the other fitting issues that I've discussed, like our vertical lengths, you know, how to raise or lower our bust points, the darts, how to fit our bust better with either a full bust adjustment if our sewing cup size is larger than what the pattern we want to sew is offering. So there's a whole masterclass on full bust adjustments. And for the opposite situation, if you have a smaller cup size and you are sewing patterns that draft for a larger cup size, you're going to run into other issues as well. So I also have a super detailed masterclass on small bust adjustments. All of these fitting videos are really practical. You can see muslins, all the ill-fitting things, features that you might find when you are sewing for yourself, and how to fix. They are all very practical. And now it's about the shoulders. Now, if you have been doing shoulder adjustments and you consider yourself to have narrow shoulders, for example, because you've been sewing for years, and you say, you know, I always have to bring the shoulders in by an inch and a half, I think that's too much. Same as if you have the opposite situation and you say, I have really broad shoulders, I always have to let out those shoulders by an inch or an inch and a half. I think those are huge adjustments, and I don't really think they stem from your shoulders. I think they just stem from your bust not fitting properly and you sewing a pattern that doesn't accommodate your sewing bust cup size. I think that is the root of the issue, of the major issue I'm saying. You know, if you've needed to do huge adjustments, of course there are individual differences, and even if you have a pattern with your sewing cup size that matches you, you still might have small issues, but then these adjustments will be smaller. You know, make your shoulders narrower by 3/8 of an inch, make them wider by 1/2 an inch. I consider those minor adjustments. They will make a difference in your feet. They're not going to cause you other fitting problems. So they're not going to affect the slope of the shoulder too much. They're not going to affect the length of the armhole too much. Consider that, and I want to show you what this means by showing you some ill-fitting tops that I have. I have created these scenarios by sewing cup sizes that are different to mine. So to put it into context, I have a sewing C cup size. That means that the difference between my high bust and my full bust is 3 inches. A lot of big four patterns that don't have cup sizes, some indie patterns also that don't offer cup size options, they draft for a B cup, which means it's just a 2-inch difference. If I don't do a full bust adjustment, I might run into lots of problems, including the shoulders. So let's see in this short clip how that could look. This is a top I've made choosing my pattern based on my full bust measurement. This is is based on a B cup and I have a C cup, and you can see some fitting issues. Although they aren't too exaggerated, I would still need to correct this. I would not be happy to wear this top like it is right now. The first of them being that these drag lines here, you can see these drag lines diagonal from the bust towards the waist or even towards the hip they could be, and that's just because the dye intake for this specific bust cup size is not giving me the correct shaping on the side. So if I make this dart a little bigger and just pinch it, you can see how much smoother this becomes right there. The other thing is, if I look up here on the top, you can see that my shoulder joint is about ½ an inch narrower than what this shoulder is right here, and that's because I chose based on my full bust. So if I were to choose a size smaller and do my full bust adjustment, I would probably get a nicer fit here on the shoulder. Now, if you have more discrepancy between the base and the size you've chosen, this might be way more dramatic. You might have shoulders hanging down here, you might have necklines that are hanging off, gaping. You can definitely see that my shoulders need bringing in right there to fit properly, and you know, I would rather choose a size that fits my upper chest better and then fits my bust with the full bust adjustment. So if I'm generally not doing full bust adjustments and I'm just picking my size based on my full bust to fit that pattern, for example, the one I've just shown you was drafted for a B cup and I have a C cup, you know, the change isn't going to be that dramatic. It could be more dramatic if you have a larger cup size. For example, if you have a double D cup size and you're choosing a pattern that is drafted for a B cup, you choose your size so that your full bust fits, but then you're going to end up with humongous shoulders, dropping, gaping necklines, and you're going to think, oh my gosh, I have such narrow shoulders. And it's actually not the shoulders that are not fitting correctly. Primarily, it's the bust that's not fitting properly in that correct cup size. Consider that. Do you really have narrow shoulders, or are you just not doing a full bust adjustment for that pattern that doesn't cater for your bust size? Typically, when we have a larger sewing cup size than what the pattern is offering us, we end up with the shoulders feeling too wide up here, and then we end up doing adjustments over here, when in essence it could be easier to just choose that pattern based on your high bust so that all this fits beautifully, and then doing a full bust adjustment to accommodate for what we need in this area. So I'm just saying, shoulder fitting issues usually stem from not sewing the correct cup size, not doing full bust adjustments. And then in the other scenario, I'm going to show you an example where I've sewn a pattern for a double D cup, I think. I'm not a double D cup, but there are patterns out there that have this cup size. So I looked at the chart where it said double D, I looked at the circumference there, and I chose the size based on my full bust there. And then that's going to create another fitting issue, so let's have a look. This is a top I've made using a larger cup size than mine, just so you can see some of the features you might see in your patterns. And the most important one that you'll see is from your bust point here, you have vertical drag lines of fabric. You can see it forming right there. So it's just excess here in the center. Too much fabric right here. This dart is too big for me, and there's just too much room, which also means I've got too much room in the waist and the hips right here also. I chose a smaller size with a larger cup size. This means that my shoulders don't fit properly. So you can see the sleeve, my shoulder joint is like ½ an inch lower than this, and it's just uncomfortable. I can feel it pulling on my upper back as well. It's just too small for this area, and that's really common to happen when you have a smaller cup size. If you're not doing a small bust adjustment, this can happen. Your shoulders might be too narrow for you, so you can see how uncomfortable that is. So basically, this is just not right for me. I do not need this cup size for sewing. I need to sew my one. That's why it's important to correct, so we get a proper bust fit and shoulder fit. So if you have a smaller bust cup size, A or B, and you are sewing a pattern that's drafted for a C cup, you might end up with the problem that, yeah, it's going to fit your full bust maybe, or you're going to have too much space, but it's going to be really tight up here because the size you chose is just too small for this area while it's going to fit you here. So what would be better? To choose a larger size that's going to fit your shoulders and then do a small bust adjustment that is going to deal with the extra volume down here. So do you really have wide shoulders that you need to open this up and make it wider? Or do you just really need to do a small bust adjustment? So I want to leave you that information there, food for thought. If you just don't want to do these full bust adjustments and small bust adjustments, you are really missing out from a nice fitting experience up here. Doing a full bust adjustment is so easy. And if you get your bust correct, I think you won't have that many shoulder fitting issues. And if you do, they are going to be small. So if your cup size is larger than what the pattern is offering you, have a look at my masterclass on full bust adjustments. Get that sorted, have an experience with that and see how the shoulders are going to fit you better. If you think that you have really narrow shoulders, you might not. You might not. If you have a smaller bust cup size and you haven't been adjusting, have a look at the masterclass on small bust adjustments. You might end up with shoulders that fit nicely. Of course, there are individual things here. And in my case, with some pattern brands, I know even though I have the correct bust cup size, my bust fits beautifully, everything's perfect, I still sometimes end with the shoulder a little wider than what I want. And one of these examples that you've seen just recently a few hours ago was the winter jacket from Itch to Stitch. I showed you there my muslin. I had already adjusted, dropped my bust height, and my C cup there was perfect. I just tweaked the shaping here on the top of the bust, perfect. But I still felt that the shoulders were a little bit too wide, maybe 3/8 of an inch. And that's just me being really particular about how I want my clothes to fit. I really want the seam to be at my shoulder joint. So if you put your finger here and you move your arm, you're going to feel it. You're going to feel where the joint moves. So that's where the seam should be. So I know exactly if it's a little lower, and I really do want to fix that. And then because I have the correct bust cup size, I find that these adjustments are minor, 3/8, half an inch. You know, the most I'd be happy to adjust is at the tops 5/8 of an inch, because the more you adjust, the more you're going to change that shoulder slope, the more you might affect the length of the armhole. And do you really want to go and get the sleeve piece and change it to fit that armhole that you've messed around with? I don't think so. I know I don't want to. I don't want you to deal with that either. So there are ways to do this adjustment that are not going to affect the length of the armhole, both for the front and the back. And you are going to perfectly be able to take your sleeve piece and sew it onto this new shape you're adjusting, either to make the shoulder narrower or wider, and you're not going to have to touch the sleeve. I'm going to show you 4 ways to adjust shoulders. The first 3 ways, I want to show them to you because you might have seen these adjustments around online.
You know, as usual, there's a lot of ways that you can do things.
So the first 3, I just want to show you how those are done and why I don't like them. In general, the reasons I don't like them is because they do change the shoulder slope and the length of the armhole, and you might need to deal with the sleeve later. And I just don't think they turn out very neat. I just don't like them. I just don't do them like that. But let's see them, because it might be one way that you've been doing it. Maybe you can consider the 4th way, which is my favorite way. So let's look at the first way. I have a generic front and a back pattern piece here. These are mini pieces. They are just going to be easier to manage and show you the details. When we do any type of shoulder adjustment, you're going to do it the same to the front and the back. There's no difference. So let's just put this back aside and work on this front piece. So you can see in red that I have drawn the seam allowances in, and my interest is to keep the length of the armhole the same. So discounting the seam allowances, I want this length here to remain the same, both for the front and the back, and that means I don't need to change the sleeve piece in any way. So I don't want to change the sleeve. I want that to stay the same while still making this narrower. First, I'm going to show you 2 methods that are not my favorite, and that is because they actually can change the armhole, the length of the arm side right here. One fast way that I've seen this done is taking this single notch as a reference here, choosing a middle point here on your shoulder and just drawing a line. Let's just draw a line across like this. Now what you would do is, from that point where you drew, you would mark the amount that you want to make it narrower. So let's say, for example, I wanted to make it half an inch narrower. I would draw that dot right here. Remember, these are mini pattern pieces. All the marks I'm doing are just references. I'm not actually measuring the half an inch. So let's just put that dot right here. And then you would just cut like this. And then you take that hinge point and overlap. But you can see there's a huge difference in the shoulder slope now. That dot isn't actually going to match that dot right here. There's just no way that can happen. Although you are making the shoulder narrower. So when you move it just like this, you are making the shoulder narrower, but you're changing the shoulder slope. So by bringing this dot over here, you're actually going to meet it like at this point. not up there. So by moving it to that dot, we have made the shoulder narrower, but you can see how skewed the seam line is now. It's really skewed, and so is the shoulder slope here. If you wanted to join these from this top edge to this right here, you'll get a really different shoulder slope here. It's just not going to make any sense. It'll actually be more pronounced, like it's going to have a greater angle going down than what you had originally. So that's why I'm not a fan of this method where you just go ahead and chop and move. I'm not a fan of that. I just do not like that at all. So if you're just cutting directly from the armhole, from the edge of your paper, all the way up to the top, you know, you're going through the seam line. So whatever change you make there, you see it really skews the shape here. You can see the original seam line that was marked in red. Your seam allowance just gets moved a lot. You have to do a lot of blending. And, you know, not everyone's great at blending. The shape that you get by eyeballing, you know, with your pen or with a French curve might not be the right shape. Might not fit your sleeve properly either. You might change the length of this armhole, and what bothers me the most about this method is just that it brings that slope down the more you bring the shoulder in. In the opposite case, if you bring the shoulder out, it makes the shoulder slope come up higher, so become more straight. So I think it can really affect that and then give you other fitting issues. So I just don't like it. I just don't like it. The other thing I'm not a fan of is if you've already made your garment and you just want a quick and dirty fix, is to just measure and take away from here. So let's say you just wanted 1/2 inch less. You just sort of like eyeball and draw that out like this, and then just cut it out. So you'd keep the seam allowance, but that would be your new line. This like quick way also changes the length from here to there. It makes it longer from here to there. So then your sleeve is not going to match exactly this length. So I'm not a fan of this either, especially with knit styles. You know, in knit styles, your sleeve is made to fit the armhole exactly 1:1. And you never want to make the armhole longer than your sleeve, because then you end up stretching out your sleeve to fit the armhole, and then you end up with puckers here and it looks pretty terrible. So I'm not a fan of this method either. Second way is like the quick and dirty way. You've already made your garment, you've already maybe set in your sleeve, and you're like, then you unpick your sleeve and you just shave it off from the side and hope for the best. That just makes your armhole so much longer. And you might get away with it if your sleeve has a lot of ease on the sleeve cap. You know, some brands design with a lot of ease. You have to gather in and set in. What if the brand that you're sewing doesn't include a lot of ease on the sleeve cap? Then you're going to have a really tight sleeve. Maybe it's not going to fit that new armhole that you've just chopped off from the edge. So I just don't like it. Look, that is the way I adjust my shoulders when I want to make a sleeveless garment, because then the sleeve is out of the picture. You know, I convert to sleeveless a lot. If I have a blouse that is supposed to have a normal armhole, I might not want the edge of my sleeveless garment to be right at my shoulder seam. I want it to be a little narrower just because it looks nicer. So then I would adjust there. I would just shave off from there and just blend into the same armhole. That's okay. That's a sleeveless design. It's a whole different story when you don't have to set in a sleeve afterwards. So I don't like to adjust shoulders like this when you are going to sew in a sleeve, especially if it's a knit garment. As I mentioned, you know, sleeves for knit garments are designed 1:1. So this, for example, I'm wearing the Sloan top from Love Notions. This sleeve matches the armhole exactly. I don't have to ease anything in here. And if I've messed with the armhole, then this might end up pulling here, and I end up trying to stretch the sleeve to match the armhole that's longer, and it just looks terrible. It just does not look good. So that's why I don't like this method. So I highly suggest you don't do it like that. Then we have another way to do this. This is the third way, and it's sort of an official way. I've seen a lot online. I just don't like it either, but let's see. Now there's another method that I've seen that sort of looks easy and approachable. What you would do is also take those notches as a reference and just draw a line across. You just make a line that will come about 1/2 point here from your shoulder, and you just draw that line down and you draw a line. So you get a 90-degree angle here. And now what you do with your pattern is you cut all of this out. You have removed the top part of the armhole. If you wanted to make this broader or just widen the shoulder, you would separate there the amount you need, 1/2 inch, something like that. You'd fill it up with paper, and you can see how it skews this seam line also, then you'd have to go in there and start smoothing out these lines. And with this method, you might also end up changing the length from here to there. So this here, if you measured it, it might change, it'll change the shape, it'll change the length. You'll get a wider shoulder though. It doesn't really upset the slope that much in this sense. And if you wanted to make it narrower, then you would draw a line here of how much you want to make it narrower. Let's say it's 1/2 inch. I'm just using 1/2 inch as an example. It could be 3/8, could be 5/8. And then you would take this and bring it in closer to here. Now, when you bring it in narrower, you've also changed the slope a little bit here as well. You've also changed this. Look at the seam line here. It's just totally skewed. And then you'd also need to come in here and fix everything. Probably add more paper to even out the seam allowances here. So you can see how these methods, even though they look and seem easy, they do actually mess a lot with the armhole. And I don't want to do that. I want to keep the length here untouched. And the shape can change, but not so drastically. The further you bring it in, the more dramatic the shoulder slope is going to change. That's why I always think these types of shoulder adjustments should be subtle. 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 an inch, maybe 5/8 of an inch. That is the maximum I would want to do this adjustment to. So I think this one is super easy to do. It's super neat. You know, you draw your lines, you adjust, you bring it in, you bring it out. But then again, you need to end up blending the armhole yourself, changing that shape yourself to match the changes that you've made. You might affect the length of that armhole as well. You also affect the slope of your shoulder a lot also. So, you know, so if you end up making it too low, then you end up with pulling right here and a really tight neckline that wants to pull up. And it's just because the slope is just too sharp, you know, if you're making your shoulders narrower. So yeah, just don't like it. But let's go ahead and see how I do it. I love doing it this way, and I'm gonna use the mini pieces again, and then I'm gonna show you 2 different scenarios with pieces that look a little different from other styles. I've also drawn the seam allowances. This length is the one I want to keep intact right here. So what I'm gonna do is just look at this shape here and look at this. I want to draw a line that's going to land around the middle point of this shoulder width and somewhere around the armhole. So I'm just going to take this ruler and I'm just going to play around with the shape there, because I want to end up cutting all the way over here and I don't want to come out lower. So if I do this lower like this, you can see I'm going to end up compromising all of this area. I don't want to do that. So I'm just going to look for the correct angle where I'm going to end up just coming off right here in this end, a little higher than that single notch. It's usually around there. So I'm going to draw a line here. That's where I'm going to make the adjustment. I'm going to have a hinge point here. I'm also going to have a hinge point right there. And then from this line, I want to draw a line that's perpendicular to this one, and it's going to go across all of this. So when I get my ruler, if I square it right here, I'm going to get a 90-degree angle here. And I'm going to go straight through that dot that's going to be my hinge. So this is where I get a 90-degree angle. Super easy to do. When you're doing pattern adjustments, it's super handy to have a ruler with this edge that has the 90-degree, because then everything is so much easier. I'm going to do a few cuts now. I'm basically going to cut from here to that point. That's going to be a hinge. And then from this edge, I'm going to cut to there. And that means that I'm going to be able to move this without upsetting the seam line and the seam allowance. So I want to keep this armhole length the same. And then over here, I'm going to cut through here up to that little dot. And then from this corner also to that little dot. And that's going to be the second hinge point. So this is now where I'm going to make a dot for the distance that I want to make this narrower. So if it's 1/2 an inch, let's just draw a dot here, 1/2 an inch. Because we have all these hinge points, the adjustment is going to come from within the pattern and it's going to leave the seam allowances almost intact. So look at this, this is all flexible. So now I can move this and meet it here. So I've made the shoulder narrower by 1/2 an inch. You can see that we haven't really changed this length here. This is still intact, that hinge point is still there. So the length of the armhole is unchanged, which means I don't have to change the sleeve. You're always going to have a little difference in the shoulder slope that you're going to need to adjust, but it's minimal. Put some paper behind, draw a new line from here to there and just adjust. Draw your seam line again. And that's how you deal with that. The further you bring this in, the more dramatic that shoulder slope change is going to be. That's why I'm not a fan of doing huge shoulder adjustments. I would rather just choose the size that's going to fit this area, the high bust. That's going to give you a nicer fit at the shoulders, and then do a full bust adjustment instead if the pattern doesn't cater for your sewing bust cup size. So if you want to make this wider, then it's just the same thing. You just put paper behind here. This is going to overlap a little. And that's how you make this area wider. You've made your shoulder wider. You can sort of keep the slope the same. This is just going to have a little bit of a different angle, but you're still keeping this the same, which means you don't need to change your sleeve piece. And this is super important because who wants to go and change a sleeve? No one. So this is a really fun way that you can play around and make your shoulders wider or narrower, and you're always going to have a great result. And this is how I do my adjustments. I want to extract a small section of footage I've shown in yesterday's video about the winter jacket, where I show you how my shoulder is wider there. So I want you to see that first. The shoulder adjustment I've done is 3/8 of an inch using the same method that you've just seen there, both on the front and the back piece. And then I want to show you how it fits. With each to stitch jackets, I usually have to do a narrow shoulder adjustment. You can see it's hanging off my shoulder by a little. There's my shoulder. So it's not huge. I'm going to do it by 3/8 of an inch. So it'll be a very small change here, but I think it will make a difference. Okay, so I've got my jacket on. As you can see, if I stand closer, here is my shoulder joint where I move, and you can see the seam is right here. It's just really correct. It's really nice. And I think this shoulder adjustment worked perfectly. Armhole didn't change, nothing changed. I used my sleeves, set it in perfectly. And now I have a jacket where the shoulder fit is just perfect. You know, even though the C-cup here from the princess seam that comes from the shoulder is correct and everything fits correct, I still had that minor adjustment to make, which is fine. It's something that you can always improve in your sewing. Any garment you make, when it fits amazingly, is going to make you feel better as well. So totally worth it. Small tiny changes. These changes take like 30 seconds to do, literally. Do the lines, it's going to be fine. This jacket has different shapes and pattern pieces compared to those little bodices I was showing you. This has princess seams here on the front. So 2 pieces, a side and a center front. At the back we have a yoke. So let me show you how you can adjust with a yoke. A yoke is something that you're going to find on shirts, jackets, shirt dresses. You know, you're going to find that a lot, and you might need to adjust the shoulders. Don't let that put you off and think it's harder. Let's just see how to do the same adjustment on a yoke. Ignore all the lines, I'm just reusing paper. This is a back yoke. So you will find things like this on shirts, jackets, maybe even dresses. You know, don't get hung up on the fact that this is a yoke, and don't think you can't do a shoulder adjustment. You can still do the same thing. So for a pattern piece where you don't have the rest of the armhole here, I would just do the adjustment on the yoke. I wouldn't continue the adjustment to the piece that comes lower than this. So I would just choose this as my hinge, just a little above the edge right here. I just choose that as my hinge point right here, and then do my line across like that, half point there of the shoulder. That is what I would do. And then I take my ruler perpendicular to there and do a line right through there. That's 90 degrees right here, and then do my adjustments. So cut through here, through the top of the shoulder, up to that hinge there, cut through this little line at the bottom, up to the dot, cut through this little line, up to that intersection, cut through this little one, up to there, making sure you have a hinge point right here. So you have 2 hinge points. Then I can draw my adjustment. 3/8 is typically what I've needed when I've needed to do this adjustment. So from where you cut, you measure in that distance, and then you just try to meet up the lines as best as you can. See, you can see that you can even play with this to keep the shoulder slope close to the original as you can. You know, you've brought it in, you get this sort of business going on, but this hasn't changed. The length right here hasn't changed. You've just changed it here and reduced the width in this area where you needed it. So that's what I do with a yoke. I know I've been showing more of a narrow shoulder adjustment on some of these little pieces, but it's the same thing. These 2 hinge points are going to allow you to either bring it in or bring it out if you need to make it wider. So if you need to make your shoulder wider, it's just the exact opposite. Just put a little piece of paper behind here, and then you can mark from this line over here the distance you need. Let's say it's 3/8 of an inch. And then this is where you would adjust this. When you are making your shoulders wider, these two little areas are going to overlap like this. You can see, and this is the way that you can keep the shoulder slope sort of unchanged. It might change a little bit, but the difference is minor compared to the methods I don't like, where you don't have this flexibility here and you're just moving a whole piece like this, you know. So that's how you'd make it wider. Just fill everything up here with paper, and that would be your new piece. When you are making this narrower, little area here, as you can see, opens. So you make it narrower, this opens up, you make it wider, and this overlaps. But whatever you're doing, this doesn't change. You can see the distance from here to there is the same. It's going to keep the length of the armhole the same, and you can use your same sleeve piece without needing to change it at all. So that's why I'm such a fan of this method. I also wanted to show you how to adjust this side piece if you're working with something that has princess seams from the shoulders. So you might think, how do I do it here? So let's see how to make it narrower or wider. For example, if you had a princess seam, this would be the side front of a princess seam that comes from the shoulder. It's the same, you know, nothing would change. I would just do my line right here for my seam allowances. I'm just eyeballing these for now, coming through here. Now, because this is sort of half point of the shoulder seam, there would be another pattern piece here. Then I would bring my adjustment closer to here, but not so close that I can't do the adjustment. So probably about an inch out from the edge. That's going to go through the armhole and then straight out like this. So not too low, because then I would keep going down all the way here. So it's just playing around until you find the right spot. It's always above that single notch here. So for this one, it would be around here, and this would be my hinge point. That would be my hinge point here. I would draw my perpendicular line at 90 degrees from this line all through there, and then I would do the exact same thing. So I'm doing lots of shoulder adjustments on different shapes so that you know that you can do this with anything. Pattern pieces have different styles and shapes, and they can compromise the shoulder, and it's always going to be the same thing. So this is the way I adjust my shoulders on anything, coats, jackets, you know, anything. This one's going to come closer to this edge because this is just a side front. You know, you would have this other piece right here, but we're doing the adjustment just on this piece. So I would measure what I need from here this way. Let's say it's 3/8 of an inch, and then I would adjust. Just match that up right here, and that would be the adjustment. This became narrower, but the length here is unchanged. The shape is pretty much unchanged. You know, maybe you would have to fill it up with paper on the back right there. Just even that out. Make sure the seam allowances are correct. You know, following your seam line. Put more paper behind there. But that is basically, this is the way I do my shoulder adjustments. And it doesn't matter if it's the front or the back. You do the same thing. If you're taking away 3/8, you do the exact same process for the front and the back, because you want in the end for these two to match and that you can sew them together and they're going to have the same width after you've done the adjustment. So you've just seen how to make this narrower. You know, I brought this in. Remember, when you bring this in and you adjust, this area opens up, as you can see. If you want to make this wider because your shoulders are wider, just put some paper behind there. Mark the distance you want to widen it from there, keeping that same line here, and then readjust. And then when you're making it wider, this is going to overlap a little here, and that is going to be the new piece. See, that hinge point there is allowing this shape to change, but as you can see, the seam line hasn't changed. You still have the same seam line as the original. It's the same length. Yes, maybe you'll need to put some paper behind here and adjust so that from the seam line you have an even seam allowance throughout this curve right here. But in essence, it'll fit the same sleeve. So nice to play around with these flexible parts to get the shapes you want without altering the shoulder slope that much and keeping this the same. So I hope this was helpful. I hope you give this fitting topic a little bit more thought. I think definitely you should sort out your bust fitting issues if you have them before considering your fitting issues as stemming from the shoulder. Usually shoulder fitting issues originate from your bust not fitting properly. And then in a second stage, you know, you might need to adjust your shoulders anyway, even if your bust fits fine, but it'll be small. It is preferable to keep the changes up here small, discreet, not changing that slope too much. Using your original sleeve, which is amazing. Who wants to go in and chop up your sleeve to adjust it to fit your new armhole? Do you want to do that? I don't want to do that. I don't want you to have to do that. So I hope you adopt this method. Give it a go. If you've done other methods, that's fine, but maybe this could be more helpful, more accurate, neater, and you might have a nice experience. I've had an amazing experience, and whenever I have to do a narrow shoulder adjustment, this is exactly the way that I do it. I've been doing it like this for years and it works like a treat. Love it. If you haven't seen the fitting series, catch up. There's a lot to see there, a lot that can help you on your journey. Don't forget to check out the Sloan sweater from Love Notions. It's $5 today, only today, Friday. It is a great pattern I've made a few times, and I'll leave you my affiliate link for that one down below as well. And thank you so much for your support. I'll see you again next week. Bye.